Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Far too often in our country, and it's something that works throughout the world and kind of world history, but is when you don't look back on history, it repeats itself. When you don't remember what had happened, and especially bad actions, they have a kind of a sense of happening yet again and saying, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening." Well, really, because you should have looked at what was happening 8 years ago, 10 years ago. We're not talking about ancient history here either. We're talking about pretty current modern history. So, as you know, at the ACLJ, we represented Tea Party groups that were being targeted by the IRS intentionally, being put on BOLO, be on the lookout list by the IRS to silence the Tea Party movement after they showed their effectiveness in the midterm elections before it got to the general election when Barack Obama was up for re-election. We took on major IRS figures like Lois Lerner. You know that the IRS had to pay out millions to a lot of these groups. You know that the IRS had to agree that they would no longer conduct themselves this way if they were suspected of doing so. They've already agreed that it was wrong, that putting together these groups, putting together these lists was wrong. But now we've got legislation moving. Legislation like H.R. 1, which has a whole lot of bad things in it. One of the bad things in it, Than, is a total repeal of the ability for the IRS. It actually repeals the law that prohibits the IRS from targeting groups based off their political beliefs. It does it in one line without telling you what he's even doing.
Yeah, Jordan, I mean, look, all of H.R. 1 is a boondoggle. If you look at what happened in the 2020 election and you look at the worst aspects of it, H.R. 1 would really enshrine all of that, not in just the states that had already happened, but in states that had better elections, Jordan. It would say we would have to take all those worst aspects and apply them across the country. It's a D.C. takeover of elections. It really is. But you're right. This one provision really hits close to home for us because we worked very hard in the wake of that IRS targeting scandal to make sure that it never happened again and successfully got Congress to enact this provision that said you cannot target based on viewpoint. You are forbidden from considering the viewpoint, from using these BOLO lists when you consider tax-exempt status. Jordan, that's been a part of the law for the last several years. This one line, it's Section 4501 in H.R. 1. It repeals that prohibition. So if H.R. 1 would become the law of the land, the Lois Lerner rule, which we've dubbed it, would be removed, and the Lois Lerner tactic of targeting groups and giving favorable treatment to those who hold one particular viewpoint or another, Jordan, that would once again be permitted at the IRS.
That is something we cannot allow. We've got to get this provision, if it has any chance in the Senate, which I think it's an uphill battle. We got to make sure provisions like that are removed. But there's a whole lot in H.R. 1. But the fact that they want to go back to a time when they could target groups without fear of losing their jobs, without fear of criminal investigation, civil violations, doing away with the, quote, Lois Lerner rule, just tells you how much they want to silence you as conservatives. They know conservative activist groups are powerful and strong and can make a difference. So what we're going to do is to play for you is to hear from those groups who were targeted the first time. As a reminder, to never let that targeting happen again. We can fight back. We did fight back. But we should never allow that kind of targeting to happen again. That's what we're going to play for you so you can hear from those groups in this special encore presentation.
Ms. Lerner, why would you say Tea Party cases were very dangerous?
On the advice of my counsel, I respectfully exercise my Fifth Amendment right and decline to answer that question.
They knew they were breaking the law. They knew they were violating our rights.
There were some boneheaded decisions out of a
but no
office.
mass corruption.
Not even mass corruption, not even a smidgen of corruption.
It was the tip of the iceberg. It was far worse than even we expected.
The IRS has finally released a list of political groups it has scrutinized.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing.
They have way too much power and no accountability.
Never before has the federal government tried to muzzle everyday Americans solely because of their political view.
That is as wrong as it gets.
Lois Lerner knew what was coming, and it wasn't going to be pretty.
We were fighting the United States of America at this point. We accidentally stumbled into the corruption that is going to be and is the largest scandal in American history.
H.R. 1, the highest priority for Speaker Pelosi's House of Representatives.
Could become the most significant overhaul of U.S. elections and government ethics in a generation.
It's an 800-page bill, chock-a-block with things that really constitutes what I would characterize as a liberal wish list.
What they are trying to do at the end of the day is to dismantle federalism and essentially dismantle the states.
Mandate same-day registration. Outlaw voter ID requirements and allow ballot harvesting. Would also require political groups to disclose high-dollar donors. Create reporting requirements for online political ads.
The For the People Act takes money from you people and gives it to these people.
This scheme, it's like a 6-to-1 match. Can you imagine the people from Tennessee are now going to be funding Nancy Pelosi's congressional race?
Packs the Federal Election Commission with Democrats, weaponizes the internal revenue system.
Permits the agency to investigate and consider the political and policy persuasions of organizations before granting tax-exempt status. Let me tell you something. We have an injunction against the IRS on exactly that point.
They want to re-empower the IRS under the Biden administration to go after conservative organizations without fear, because we've put the fear into that tax-exempt division.
It allows the agency to investigate. That should scare everybody. And consider the political and policy persuasions of organizations before granting tax-exempt status. You mean like if they're pro-life or conservative?
H.R. 1 takes that prohibition in federal statute and repeals it.
None of us could do this without you. And it's not just talk, it's action. This is going to be a real fight. I mean, this is going to be every day a battle. And that's why it's ACLJ more than ever.
In the fall of 2008, when the bailouts happened, I was really awakened to what was happening to our country, and basically our government was mortgaging the future of our country.
People are paying for the government's debt, and that at the end of the day, and people were sick of paying that much debt. They still are. So that's kind of what sparked it, and we saw the first tea parties on the rant.
This is America. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? Raise their hand. How about we all? President Obama, are you listening?
Jason,
you get people fired up.
Jason, you want to?
We're thinking of having a Chicago Tea Party in July.
A lot of people forgot what the T, the E, and the A stood for. It was taxed enough already. And that was what had really kind of generated this movement, grassroots movement, that was not partisan. So it wasn't just Republicans. It wasn't even just conservatives, but it was people across the country who said, you know, I've just had it with the federal government.
What got me into this, what brought me off the sidelines and into this, I can tell you very specifically. I'm a businessman. I rely on contracts. And when they were doing the car bailouts, President Obama treated the bondholders who had a specific position in a bankruptcy, which is what the bailout, the car companies was, and basically said, you know, those legal contracts you have don't matter. I'm the president. We're just going to do this.
I know that when people hear the word bankruptcy, it can be unsettling. So let me explain exactly what I mean. What I'm talking about is using our existing legal structure as a tool that, with the backing of the U.S. government, can make it easier for General Motors and Chrysler to quickly clear away old debts that are weighing them down so that they can get back on their feet and onto a path to success.
And as a businessman, I'm like, whoa, 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 you know, you've got to have contract law. You know, if they can tear up these contracts for these powerful bondholders, what can they do to my contracts? And literally, that's what brought me into the fight, because I said, if we don't have contract law, if we don't have the rule of law, well, then we don't have a country anymore.
While Americans are finding ways to cut back, the Democrat Congress and our president have gone on an unprecedented spending binge. Bailout after bailout.
The battle on Capitol Hill to respond to that proposed $25 billion bailout for the struggling big three automakers.
General Motors now has flat tires and a dead battery. But Barack Obama's ready to hop in the driver's seat with a $30 billion jumpstart.
Our government will be making a significant additional investment of about $30 billion in GM.
Chrysler is a different story.
not viable as a standalone company. But the government will give it 30 more days to finish a possible agreement with Fiat.
One bailout may give them 6 months, may give them a year, but they're still going to be sick. They need to restructure.
Understand, we're making these investments not because I want to spend the American people's tax dollars, but because I want to protect them.
Why go bankrupt when you can get Congress to bail you out?
This bailout business deal is getting offensive. I mean, every industry now is looking for a handout, and the only requirement to actually getting one is being a failure.
A set of sacrifices from all parties involved: management, labor, shareholders, creditors, suppliers, dealers.
Protests across the United States. Tea Party protests are erupting across the country. Angry taxpayers, or at least some of them, are taking to the streets in the spirit of the Boston Tea Party.
Although I'm an attorney by trade, my wife and I are both homeschoolers and teachers. We teach both in our own family. We teach in families in the community. And it was out of that I was inspired to form an organization called Lynchpins of Liberty, which is an American leadership development enterprise whose motto is to challenge the imagination of the rising generation. And we do that by mentoring high school and college students in particular in moral and political philosophy to give them a taste for freedom and the skills to be free.
I kind of remember almost to the day, you know, the light bulb flashing off in my head, that moment of, clarity that I had to do this, because when Obama first got elected, I thought, man, we're going to give this guy a chance. He can heal a lot of wounds. I mean, there could be a lot of unity going on here. And the first thing he did was Obamacare. This goes so far away from liberty at this point that, we've got to do something. We've got to organize. We've got to start educating people. So that was kind of the moment. It was like, boom, okay, I got to get involved with this stuff. It all kind of came together at the same time. And that's when I went to the group and said, okay, what can I do?
The community was looking for some answers, and we're really not seeing any of those answers when you're talking about in the people who were put up to be voted on by either party. We just didn't feel like they were speaking to us.
We put out a call just on a meetup at the time saying, hey, anybody else feel like this? Let's get together in March. And we thought we'd have a few people over to our house. We had tons of people emailing, calling. Pretty soon we figured out real quick we were going to outgrow our house. So we organized local groups at that point. And all across Kentucky, we had 8 different local groups that then met under the Kentucky 912 banner that were just local meetups that just came together. These wasn't politicians.
And we ended up with over 1,000 at the noon event and close to 2,000 at the evening event. So we were like, this is crazy, how many people showed up.
We met on June 30th or somewhere in there of 2009. We met with 3 people at a Cracker Barrel and decided to have our first Tea Party. And it was too close to July 4th to have one when everyone was having them July 4th. So our first one was on July 11th in Ravenna, Ohio, on the lawn of the courthouse. And we had 345 people show up for our first Tea Party.
The meetings that we began having right after that first Tea Party, we began meeting every month, and we would talk about different issues, whether it was fiscal policy or the history of our country.
The 912 Project was originally founded on 9 principles and 12 values. Or another way to look at it, a lot of people talked about it, was the day the people were after 9/11, when we wasn't red states, blue states. We were United States. We were united on principles and working towards the same goal. And you really looked out for your neighbor, and things were about that local community. And that's really what we tried to get back to. Principles, values, community. That was the bedrocks of the 912 Project. And Kentucky 912 Project really amplified that in the state of Kentucky.
I'm a teacher. I was a homeschool mom and have an education background. I love teaching. So for me, I enjoyed the research of what was happening, and then I wanted to tell others about these bills and what was happening, and we would provide outlets for people at the meeting to be able to, what should they say to their congressman? What are things that they need to be worried about, certain parts of the bills? And we were able to help them have a vehicle and to let them know we are with them. We are doing this as well. We are making phone calls, and I would show people how to make a phone call and, give them a script if they didn't know what to say. And these were all things that just helped empower the people to be able to stand up for what they think is right.
We had everything from grandmas and grandpas who were retired, maybe teachers, businessmen, clergy, military, people that worked in factories. We had some that were in law enforcement. We had some that were elected officials. We had, the broad spectrum.
Outside the Capitol, a few hundred members of the conservative Tea Party movement called on Congress to kill the Democratic health care reform bill.
There's a Tea Party tidal wave, and we're sending a message to them.
What makes the so-called Tea Party movement so significant is that it isn't driven by any one personality or issue. There's no list of members or chapters. Best guess is that several 100,000 participated in one or more of the protests last year. There's no one office or figure who speaks for the movement.
The government takes so much of our money, and I feel like it's just endless. It never ends. It's never enough.
The central message is around fiscal responsibility, and there are a lot of other issues that other people find very important, but the driving focus is on fiscal responsibility, limited government, free markets.
Tea Party activists from all over the state gathered today at the South Florida Water Management District's monthly board meeting. They came to show their opposition to Governor Charlie Crist's proposed $536 million Everglade restoration land deal.
The Tea Party movement is an expression of what I think is a mainstream, widespread sentiment in America that Washington is broken, that both parties are to blame.
This thing took off like a rocket. Like I said, our first meeting was on July 11th of 2009. Like within 3 months, we're taking like 7 buses to Washington. Well, like you said, I'm a businessman. First of all, people don't understand. For us to take 7 buses, I got to come up with $21,000 out of my own pocket to pay for the buses before I collect your money to get that money back. So what am I worried about? I'm worried about insurance. I'm worried about liability. I'm worried about structuring our group in a way that, we can have protections that a normal business would have. I just figured we'd be, a regular LLC. I figured we'd be some sort of a simple, type of corporation.
These groups began to expand. Now, when I say expand, some were, they went from 10 members to like 30 or 40. They needed to rent a bus. They started to raise some money coming in. They wanted to put on an event or a speaker series. So they had to raise some money to pay the speaker or to rent a room or to buy some food. But also, if you're going to take a bus trip, you need to have an entity that can purchase insurance. So if anything happened on the trip for anybody who's involved. So these groups, as they grew, they needed some kind of legal status. So they voluntarily, on their own, not forced, but voluntarily, submitted themselves to IRS oversight.
We decided right off the bat we needed to raise some money because we wanted to start a website and have an email service. And all of these things cost money. A meeting space, you need to pay rent for a meeting space. If you fly in a speaker, you need to be able to do those kinds of things. Everyone at the Wetumpka Tea Party is a volunteer. No one makes any money. Everything that is raised is sent right back into the organization so that we can further our work.
Because of the support of every member of the ACLJ, one of the practice areas that we've been able to develop is Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA requests.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
The goal here is to gather the puzzle pieces. Sometimes you don't know which ones will be important until they become important.
Government agencies acting out of control.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
It is your statutory right as an American citizen to have access to documents that reveal how the government is functioning, how your government is functioning.
Do you remember the Iran deal? There was a video about what took place on that deal, and it was edited. The edit took out the key part of what was going on. State Department, White House, editing videos to keep it from the American public.
We know because our FOIA litigation got that document.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that.
And what the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. Because of the litigation we engaged in, they can't do what they were doing before.
They've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
All of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
Many times when we make these requests, the requests actually end up in court as the bureaucracy fights back to withhold the information. But that's okay because the law is on our side. We are entitled to the information that is in these requests that we have made.
We've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask.
We have caught them now.
They have no one in there to protect them anymore. They were used to the bureaucracy protecting them.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Support the work of the ACLJ with our matching challenge. Go to aclj.org. It's all because of you. And you can double the impact your donation today at aclj.org. Go online and donate now.
It's real simple. 501c4, you can't do more than 49% political activity. It's just that simple. And you know what? And then what's political activity? Well, I learned what the word electioneering means. Well, basically what it comes down to is anything you spend money on in politics, TV, radio, newspapers, mailers, direct mail, those things are prohibited. You have to report them. There's limits on what you can spend. There's all kinds of rules. So we understood perfectly clearly what we were applying for when we applied for a 501c4, because we're business people. We read the contract.
So, I mean, a 501c4 organization gets tax-exempt status in the U.S. because it promotes something related to the social welfare. It's something that's happening in your local community or in the area you live in, so it's a group of citizens. Ultimately, it's about an issue, basically. It can be one issue. It can be a set of issues that you come together to work on and agree upon. It's not specifically for politics, but certainly, of course, when you deal with issues that affect the community, ultimately there's some politics that comes into play. But it's uniquely lays out how you do this without becoming a political action committee, without being keeping that tax-exempt status. You go to the IRS and say, we want this status. So we will submit voluntarily to your oversight, IRS. We will abide by the rules. We will abide by the reporting requirements necessary so that we get this status as a tax-exempt organization.
When I filed our 501c4 paperwork, I actually filled it out over the 4th of July of 2010. Because I was on call. I work in hospitals, and I was on call, so I didn't have any plans that day. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and go through and get this paperwork filled out. So I got it all filled out, sent in, and within a couple weeks, we got the letter back saying, we've received your application. You should receive within 90 days. You'll either receive your status, we'll ask for clarification or more information, or you'll be denied. Okay, fine.
We had been a Tea Party group for about a year and a half when we decided we really needed to be able to show the government what we were doing with our money and to make sure that everything was on the up and up. So in October of 2010, we did apply for tax-exempt status. We sent in a complete application. Everything was there. The IRS sent a letter back saying that within 60 to 90 days, we should have an answer for you. So that sounded reasonable.
I realized we never did get anything back from the IRS, so we started trying to call.
I call the IRS agent, I write to them, I say, when are we going to get this? No response whatsoever. We go all the way through 2011, and we want to file our taxes. We want to do the right thing. We want to, we're good citizens. We're trying to help them help us. Nothing until we get into January of 2012. And in January 2012, I received this letter with a bunch of questions. And as the first correspondence we'd had with them at all. And it came out of the blue. We were just shocked. I mean, it just came in the mail. And then I started to read these questions, and that's when things really got interesting.
We finally get a letter from the IRS telling us that they will not approve our tax-exempt status unless we answer almost 90 more questions. Otherwise, if you don't answer these, you're taken out and you can't have a tax-exempt status.
The letter that I got from the IRS not only was filled with egregious questions, but it gave me a very short timeline and a window to answer those questions.
And in these questions were questions about family members of boards. There were questions about donors and activity beyond just the normal list of donors, but what their activities and affiliations were as well. I said they would take thousands of hours to get all the information detailed to what they wanted. It would probably take thousands of dollars to put it all together, and they gave us 2 weeks to comply.
I remember standing at my desk reading the letter from the IRS and reading the questions that they wanted me to answer. And as I read through those, at first I was kind of scared because when you get a letter from the IRS, you think, oh no, I'm in trouble. But I knew we hadn't done anything, but I was kind of scared. And then as I read what they wanted, I became angry. The IRS wanted to have names of all our volunteers, board members. They wanted copies of every speech ever given. They wanted to know who the speakers were, what were their credentials. They wanted copies of every handout we had ever given. They wanted to see every form of communication, whether it was an email, a letter, a phone call, every communication we had had with the legislative body. The IRS was demanding that we send this to them. They wanted passwords to places on the internet. Just unbelievable items that have nothing to do with the tax-exempt status. And I think that is when I really realized we are being targeted.
It was unbelievably disturbing what the IRS had sent out in these questionnaires to these groups that they knew were being led by private individuals without a lot of experience in politics. They were small. They knew that from their initial applications.
We started getting calls, just in the beginning, just from a couple of organizations that had got an initial inquiry from the Internal Revenue Service. And initially, you couldn't tell whether it was just a local situation like what we call a compliance audit, or whether it was part of a bigger program. So initially, I think it was literally 2 phone calls. And then what happened was, over a very short period of time, I'm talking about days, we realized that there were dozens, maybe hundreds of these inquiry letters out there.
How do you fight the government? How do you fight the IRS? And so a big concern of us was legal representation. So we may be right, we may be getting attacked by our government, but can we defend ourselves? So we started talking about, well, who could we talk to? Who could we even reach out to that might possibly do this? And fortunately, and I mean that, fortunately, Jay Sekulow agreed to join one of our conference calls.
We decided that the best way to handle this was, since these groups kind of knew each other and had relations with each other, to get them all on a call to find out what happened here. Get them all on a call so you know what took place.
I remember he was on the call, but he listened. He didn't even say anything for like, I don't know, half an hour, okay? And these stories are coming through the phone lines from all these people, saying, oh, yeah, they wanted to know what books we were reading, and we want a book report. Or, we wanted to know how many of your board members have ever run for political office, and we want their family name, the names of their family members, and if any of them have run for political office, and we want to know if they ever plan to run for political office. And you're going, whoa, 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 whoa. And Jay Sekulow broke in on the call. And he just said, I'm going to tell you right now, we will represent all of you, for this. This is completely wrong. This is something I've never seen this before. I've never heard of this before. And the ACLJ is going to stand up and fight for you in this case. And that was a huge relief, because until then, we weren't sure how we were going to fight back.
What we found out on that large conference call was that everybody was being asked the same thing from all these different offices. They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with. This was very, very serious.
At that point, we were scared. We were intimidated. To have an organization with the power that the IRS has breathing down your neck and threatening things is incredibly intimidating. For an average American, I mean, it was just like, could they come after our spouses' jobs? Could they, what's going to happen to us here? We were frightened. And I'll never forget what Jay said when he said, well, we're going to handle this. And he said, I know all of you are frightened by this, and I just want you to know we've got your back, and we're going to be taking care of this, and it's going to be okay. And I felt like the weight of the world was off of my shoulders. I mean, I finally felt like I could take a deep breath, and it was going to be okay.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Far too often in our country, and it's something that works throughout the world and kind of world history, but is when you don't look back on history, it repeats itself. When you don't remember what had happened, and especially bad actions, they have a kind of a sense of happening yet again and saying, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening." Well, really, because you should have looked at what was happening 8 years ago, 10 years ago. We're not talking about ancient history here either. We're talking about pretty current modern history. So as you know, at the ACLJ, we represented Tea Party groups that were being targeted by the IRS, intentionally being put on BOLO, be on the lookout list by the IRS to silence the Tea Party movement after they showed their effectiveness in the midterm elections before it got to the general election with when Barack Obama was up for re-election. We took on major IRS figures like Lois Lerner. You know that the IRS had to pay out millions to a lot of these groups. You know that the IRS had to agree that they would no longer conduct themselves this way if they were suspected of doing so. They've already agreed that it was wrong, that putting together these groups, putting together these lists was wrong. But now we've got legislation moving. Legislation like H.R. 1, which has a whole lot of bad things in it. One of the bad things in it, Than, is a total repeal of the ability for the IRS. It actually repeals the law that prohibits the IRS from targeting groups based off their political beliefs. It does it in one line without telling you what he's even doing.
Yeah, Jordan, I mean, look, all of H.R. 1 is a boondoggle. If you look at what happened in the 2020 election and you look at the worst aspects of it, H.R. 1 would really enshrine all of that, not in just the states that had already happened, but in states that had better elections, Jordan. It would say we would have to take all those worst aspects and apply them across the country. It's a D.C. takeover of elections. It really is. But you're right. This one provision really hits close to home for us because we worked very hard in the wake of that IRS targeting scandal to make sure that it never happened again and successfully got Congress to enact this provision that said you cannot target based on viewpoint. You are forbidden from considering the viewpoint, from using these BOLO lists when you consider tax-exempt status. Jordan, that's been a part of the law for the last several years. This one line, it's Section 4501 in H.R. 1. It repeals that prohibition. So if H.R. 1 would become the law of the land, the Lois Lerner rule, which we've dubbed it, would be removed. And the Lois Lerner tactic of targeting groups and giving favorable treatment to those who hold one particular viewpoint or another, Jordan, that would once again be permitted at the IRS.
That is something we cannot allow. We've got to get this provision, if it has any chance in the Senate, which I think it's an uphill battle. We've got to make sure provisions like that are removed. But there's a whole lot in H.R. 1. But the fact that they want to go back to a time when they could target groups without fear of losing their jobs, without fear of criminal investigation, civil violations, doing away with the, quote, Lois Lerner rule, just tells you how much they want to silence you as conservatives. They know conservative activist groups are powerful and strong and can make a difference. So what we're going to do is to play for you is to hear from those groups who were targeted the first time. As a reminder, to never let that targeting happen again. We can fight back. We did fight back, but we should never allow that kind of targeting to happen again. That's why we're going to play for you so you can hear from those groups in this special encore presentation.
We had a group in Shelby County, Ohio, that I've had the privilege of representing this county for 20-some years now in one office or another. They came to us and said, look, we think we're getting harassed. We're trying to get our C4 status, and they're asking us all kinds of ridiculous questions. And our staff actually went and met with Lois Lerner. The oversight committee staff and some of our personal staff sat down with Lois Lerner, and she says, no, this is normal. We're not doing anything out of the ordinary. I mean, she just lied to them. And so we decided, you know what, let's just ask the Inspector General to do an investigation. Once the IRS knew that they were caught, that Russell George, the Inspector General, was going to release the report and say targeting took place. Once they knew that was coming, what did they do? Lois Lerner was giving a speech to a bar association meeting here in town, and they had planted questions where they asked her about this. So she tried to get in front of the story, spin the story, because they knew the truth was coming out.
H.R. 1 the highest priority for Speaker Pelosi's House of Representatives?
Could become the most significant overhaul of U.S. elections and government ethics in a generation.
It's an 800-page bill, chock-a-block with things that really constitutes what I would characterize as a liberal wish list.
What they are trying to do at the end of the day is to dismantle federalism and essentially dismantle the states.
Mandate same-day registration, outlaw voter ID requirements, and allow ballot harvesting. Would also require political groups to disclose high-dollar donors, create reporting requirements for online political ads.
The For the People Act takes money from you people and gives it to these people.
This scheme, it's like a 6-to-1 match. Can you imagine the people from Tennessee are now going to be funding Nancy Pelosi's congressional race?
Packs the Federal Election Commission with Democrats, weaponizes the internal revenue system.
Permits the agency to investigate and consider the political and policy persuasions of organizations before granting tax-exempt status. Let me tell you something. We have an injunction against the IRS on exactly that point.
They want to re-empower the IRS under the Biden administration to go after conservative organizations without fear, because we've put the fear into that tax-exempt division.
It allows the agency to investigate. That should scare everybody. And consider the political and policy persuasions of organizations before granting tax-exempt status. You mean like if they're pro-life or conservative?
H.R. 1 takes that prohibition in federal statute and repeals it.
None of us could do this without you. And it's not just talk, it's action. This is going to be a real fight. I mean, this is going to be every day a battle. But that's why it's ACLJ more than ever.
At a lawyers' conference in Washington, Lois Lerner, a senior IRS career employee who oversees tax-exempt organizations, admitted that agency employees singled out particular groups for extra scrutiny, using key words with political overtones.
They used names like Tea Party or Patriots, and they selected cases simply because the application had those names in the title. That was wrong. The IRS would like to apologize for that.
Yeah, the apology, though, was nonsense. I mean, sorry about that, is what she said. For that, we'd like to apologize. I'll never forget that. Could you imagine you're being audited and you tell them, I don't have my receipts. Sorry about that. So, apologizing for unlawful activity may be, good for the soul. It's not good for a legal conclusion. And the fact that they apologized was an admission of wrong. But all they were trying to do at that ABA meeting was get ahead of a problem they knew was about to explode, because we had punctured the balloon.
The government's view and their response at this point was to say, oh, we're sorry. We acknowledge what we did wrong. Well, can you imagine if that was what happened in criminal law? The criminal is caught after murder, after stealing, and says, oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Okay, you're off scot-free.
Lerner said the targeting was done by low-level employees who were motivated not by partisan politics, but by a desire to be more efficient in identifying groups that don't qualify for tax-exempt status.
We had a shortcut in the process that the staff did. It wasn't appropriate.
And Lois Lerner apologized and said, oh, sorry, we targeted him. We didn't know. That came out of Cincinnati. We knew those were lies. We knew those were lies because I kept every traffic report from our website, every single one. And I know it was Washington, D.C. I know the office, I know the computer, I know the IP address. It just doesn't give me a name. It gives me a physical address. I knew it wasn't out of Cincinnati, and I knew she was lying again. So she lied when she gave the apology.
I have a letter right here from Lois Lerner prior to the date when she suggested that it was rogue agents, asking me for information, telling me that my letter of determination could not be granted. She had inserted herself into the situation when it was convenient. But when she was going to be exposed, all of a sudden she blamed it on the rogue agents in Cincinnati.
I had just received a letter from her. So I knew what she said stopped a year ago had never stopped. It was still going on. And I didn't believe anything that she said. I did not believe that she was innocent. I think that she knew exactly what was going on and that she was one of the ones directing it.
The report is coming out this week, the Inspector General report, and it has outrageous conclusions about how organizations seeking tax-exempt status were handled.
It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups that dared to criticize government spending and discuss the national debt.
I have obtained a soon-to-be-released investigative report that shows that the IRS started targeting Tea Party groups more than 3 years ago, and that among the criteria they used was to target groups that were critical of the way the country is being run.
If, in fact, IRS personnel engaged in the kind of practices that have been reported on and were intentionally targeting conservative groups, then that's outrageous.
They blame this all on low-level employees. But Tea Party leaders, they're not buying it. They rejected the apology and demanded the resignation of everyone involved at the IRS.
About 75 groups were flagged by the IRS for further review for one reason. Their applications for tax-exempt status contain the words Tea Party or Patriot.
2 rogue agents. That's what the White House tells us were the people responsible for this. In fact, I got a news report from May 15th that says White House aides, 2 rogue IRS employees from Cincinnati were responsible for investigating conservative groups. 2 employees in Cincinnati responsible for the systematic targeting of conservative groups for over 2 years. This administration would have us believe that. This administration, this agency, the very agency charged with enforcing Obamacare, systematically targeted groups who came into existence because they opposed Obamacare, and they started the targeting the very month, March 2010, that Obamacare became law, expects us to believe it was just the work of 2 rogue agents.
So I had a call from a friend of mine who said, Kevin, I'm going to do a test. He said, I'm going to file something. I'm going to file my own C3 application as an organization that shares values, or that at least is in line with what the current political administration believes. And I'm going to tell you whether or not that goes through. And sure enough, it went through within the normal periods. And that was at the same time that we're learning from the IG report that there was this BOLO list, be on the lookout, B-O-L-O, for organizations that contained any ideas of liberty, sovereignty, family, any kind of dissent against any policies of the Obama administration. Those were targeted and put into the separate bin that had to have extra scrutiny by the IRS. I mean, it's just, again, the stunning nature and the egregiousness of our own government reaching in and deciding, based on what you believe, Mr. Kukaji, we're going to actually apply additional scrutiny to you.
We accidentally stumbled into the corruption that is going to be and is the largest scandal in American history.
Under huge pressure from federal judges, the IRS has finally released a list of political groups it has scrutinized. No surprise, most of them are conservative, and there are hundreds of organizations involved.
What the Internal Revenue Service had done was to have created a list, a be on the lookout list, that really said to its agents in the exempt organizations unit, if you see an organization that has certain buzzwords or words in it that would suggest they are conservative in their political outlook or in their political message, we want you to basically give them a hard time in getting tax-exempt status. Make them answer a lot of hard questions. Make them answer questions that other organizations on the political left don't have to answer, and just make it tough on them to get tax-exempt status so we can string it out.
The Tea Party groups were on these lists. So were some pro-life groups, basically conservative in nature. When they went through the list, they could only identify out of like hundreds, maybe a couple that weren't political or may not have been conservative organizations. The rest were all. So terms like liberty, freedom, Constitution, that is what the IRS sent out to its agents that handled tax-exempt applications. For words to look for in the application, even in the name of the organization itself.
That is a violation of the First Amendment to the Constitution, which ensures that the government will not abridge, that is, harm the ability of citizens to speak what they believe politically is their point of view. I can't imagine a harder entity to come against than the IRS. Let me tell you, the IRS is a formidable foe.
Oftentimes, this is one of the most feared government institutions in the U.S. They get your taxes, they determine how much you owe, if you owe back taxes, they can seize your wage. I mean, all these things the IRS can do, a lot of power. They know everything about you, basically. So to sue them voluntarily took a very brave group of individuals and organizations that decided, okay, let's do this, ACLJ. We want to fight back for our rights. We want to fight for our recognition and fight for what we deserve from the IRS. Let's take them to court.
There was a serious systematic problem within the IRS that allowed this issue to percolate all the way to the top. And was Lois Lerner was the head of the tax-exempt organization. You had Maine Treasury. There were concerns that it reached into the White House. And, you know, and President Obama dismissed this as inconsequential. But ultimately, the way to handle this was court. You had to be in court to get this resolved.
The reason we got into it is because the original reason the Kentucky 9/12 Project was formed for principle. We felt that our rights were being violated, that we had a constitutional right that wasn't allowed to go forward, and that thanks to the ACLJ, we had a voice now that could fight back, shine a light on what was happening. So even if we didn't get what we deserved, that in the future, other organizations may be empowered to stand up and have that voice.
You can't just say, we're not going to sue. You can't say we're going to just let them trample on our rights. It was time to stand up. And I was proud of the other leaders who did the same.
We're getting ready to go up against our government. We're getting ready to fight the IRS, the Department of Justice, me, and the Kentucky 9/12 Project. And it was fear because we didn't know retaliation. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if this meant, you know, every year thereafter I'm going to be audited. Didn't know if, you know, what could happen to us and happen to my little, you know, at that point, 2-year-old.
We decided we were going to move forward with the lawsuit, that they can't get away with this, and that if we didn't fight back, who was going to? They would just keep doing this. And future presidents could do this, and future administrations, and, you know, we didn't know who started it, but we wanted to find out. So the ACLJ agreed to sue.
I felt angry. I felt that an injustice was being done, and I felt ready to fight.
We are not there to represent ourselves. We weren't really looking for justice for the Tea Parties. What we were there was to make sure that no other American could ever be targeted again by their government for their political beliefs.
I was at a board meeting at Youth for Jesus, and the executive director said, we've got a case. The Supreme Court had just granted review. It was about literature distribution at airports.
We wanted to have the Bible study meet in the school, but it turned into a problem when the principal said, no, you can't have it.
I told her that I wanted to sing Noel, and she said, the principal said that we can't have anything to do with Christ in our songs.
We marched around the country defending evangelism in Chicago, in Boston, in New York, Atlanta, Texas, Southern California, Northern California, and points in between.
We got a letter one evening from the IRS saying they wanted all this information that we all knew immediately was not right.
How do you fight the government? How do you fight the IRS?
Tea Party groups say they're being targeted by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're enlisting the aid of the American Center for Law and Justice.
They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with. This was very, very serious.
The federal courts do not need to become monitors of state trespass actions, and that's all this is.
We were looking for the right to speak our minds and our consciences, and we won that right today.
Religious persecution is a situation where your life is literally put in jeopardy simply because of what you believe.
Can you help? Can you do something? He's on death row, and so we launched an international campaign.
His freedom now rests solely on diplomatic efforts by the United States government and world leaders dedicated to human rights.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
There was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
Tea Party groups say they're being targeted by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're enlisting the aid of the American Center for Law and Justice.
We're now looking at somewhere around 100 different contacts have come in, and a couple of them we've just signed on recently as clients who will be amending our lawsuit.
Who came up with this? Why did you have these applications sitting for years, and then all of a sudden you decide right during an election you're going to send out these letters, which frankly for these small Tea Party groups, pretty intimidating. I've got letters from California, Cincinnati, the District of Columbia, and on it goes. You had institutional incapacity going on inside the IRS, and I think that has made the problem even worse. What they've done is a crime.
We couldn't have done it without Jay's leadership. I know that sounds a little much to say, but I've known Jay for 4 decades, and he is a dynamic person. He has a tremendous personality. He has tremendous drive. He's got great skill. He is a quick study. He knows the law. He knows the facts of anything that he's going to get into, and you're not going to talk him down. And the other thing about Jay is that courts respect him, judges know him. The Supreme Court of the United States, before which he has appeared so many times, has a great respect for him, and therefore to the ACLJ. And when Jay speaks, they listen.
At that point, the difference was we were fighting privately and no one knew what was going on. With the lawsuit and the ability to file litigation, it took the case to a national level, which then brought that much more pressure on the government to start. Even though the government was reluctant and resistant to everything that we brought forward, they couldn't escape the microscope of the public pressure and the media pressure at that point.
In May of 2013, we filed suit against the IRS in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia on behalf of all of our clients. But it wasn't until October of 2014, it's a long time for one of these nonprofit organizations, these were small organizations, that the court ultimately rendered a decision on all but 2 of our claims. So in January 2015, we appealed the dismissal and we seek review by the U.S. Court of Appeals. The actual oral argument on the appeal wasn't heard until April 14th of 2016. On August 5th, 2016, the U.S. Court of Appeals rendered its decision in our favor, reversing the district court's dismissal of our claims for injunctive and declaratory relief and remanding the case for further proceedings in the district court. That is not what the IRS wanted. So the parties then engaged in limited discovery before ultimately the IRS entered into a settlement agreement with our clients in October of 2017. The IRS publicly admitting wrongdoing and issued a public apology to our clients for the targeting they were engaged in.
It's not just that they're acknowledging the wrongdoing, they've taken action that'll be codified in a court order next week that it never happens again. So there's been a complete change of policy as it relates to the IRS. It's been 3.5 years in litigation. We've had to make a trip up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia to get the trial court judge reversed, which we were successful at. And the good news is also, which is the really bottom line here, is our clients all got their tax-exempt status.
I want them to admit they did wrong, and I want them to apologize in writing. And if they can't apologize in writing, I'm not settling.
So we were in federal court to get the policy changed, to get the rules and regulations changed, that they were at least what they were going by, so you could stop these targeted inquiries. And we were successful in that, in large part because the IRS ultimately knew their exposure was great here. They violated the statute, they violated the Constitution, they violated our clients' First Amendment rights, they violated the right to freedom of association, they violated the right basically to freedom of the press, they were engaged in an arbitrary and capricious method of trying to harass people that they disagreed with, and we were in front of a federal court, and that federal court was not too sympathetic to the IRS with everything they heard. So the end result was the IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organizations.
The IRS is a serious institution, and it should be. But it's one we should be able to trust because it knows everything about us, that it's not going to treat me differently because of my views. My religion, my politics are not going to determine how the IRS treats me. And we wanted to make sure that the IRS knew they couldn't get away with doing that. So, of course, the IRS people have this view of it as maybe the most feared government institution by the American individual. I don't think that people feel that way anymore. I think if you ask people, do they feel that way about the IRS? They may not love the IRS, again, because you got to pay your taxes and you have money out of your paycheck, but I don't think it's the most feared anymore. And I think that's because of the changes that had to be made at the IRS because of our victory.
You know, the federal government got caught going after conservative organizations, conservative Tea Party groups around the country. And in the end, it was the conservative groups who won in court and everything else. That's the good news, that the good guys won in the end, which is how I think, like, you know, in this country it typically works.
And they've agreed that it's wrong to apply U.S. laws against any individual based upon their name, the positions that they hold, provided they're lawful positions, which ours, of course, were, the issues that we espouse, or our associations or even perceived associations. That's the first point. The second point is that the government has agreed that their actions, whatever they take in this process, must be even-handed and never based upon the applicant's name, their political viewpoint, or associations or perceived associations. And then the government finally declared or agreed that discrimination on the basis of our viewpoints, right? That the government, in administering the tax code, it's a violation, a fundamental violation of our First Amendment rights, which we knew all along, but the government was denying, to treat us differently in getting tax-exempt status or any treatment under the tax code based solely upon our point of view. So to have these now agreed and admitted by the U.S. government will provide precedent, which I hope in the future will at least hold at bay when someone is tempted to do this again.
They admitted that they lied, cheat, broke the law, you know, and I guess that's the first time, in my understanding, that they've ever admitted in a court proceeding that that they actually did something wrong.
We had things put in place so they wouldn't do it again to somebody else, which is even more important. And the most important, that then becomes a precedent for that next group that comes 5, 10 years from now. My 9-year-old, when she grows up, she can say, hey, my dad did it. I can do it too. And she has a voice. And that's really why we did this. It wasn't for me, it was for her. And that's truly what we won when we got the settlement.
This country is a great country, the greatest in the world, and it is worth any battle to preserve our liberty. And I think that it's important to surround yourself with like-minded people, to help others understand what's happening, and then fight, and keep fighting, and fighting, and fighting, because we'll never stop. It is not natural for liberty to thrive. There's always someone who wants to be a tyrant and who wants to take our liberty. So you must make an effort to fight the battle.
And I told people when we announced the settlement, they said, well, why is this important? Why is this important? I said, because in the future, if any group feels like they're being targeted, ever, they can go to federal court and bring our case that, you know, the judge ruled and enjoined the IRS, said you can't do this anymore. And they can say, they're targeting me because of my politics, and you got to stop them. And that's not going to take 5 years. That's going to take 5 minutes. That's a victory because it protects our rights going forward. How much better does it get than that, particularly when you said, oh yeah, we're going to fight the IRS. Oh yeah, we're going to sue the U.S. government. No one thought we could do it. We did it.